NASA's own mass spectrometers, instruments aboard Viking, instruments aboard Curiosity, measured something in the Martian atmosphere that should have set off alarms in every physics department on Earth. Xenon-129, an isotope so specific, so unmistakable, that nuclear weapons physicists use it as the definitive signature of one event and one event only: thermonuclear detonation. On Earth, you find elevated Xenon-129 in the atmosphere around nuclear test sites: Nevada, Kazakhstan, the Marshall Islands. On Mars, it's everywhere. 2.5 times the concentration found on our planet. Not in isolated pockets, not in faint traces, globally, saturating the entire atmosphere like the afterglow of a fire that burned out long ago. And here's what makes this data so unsettling. The isotopic pattern doesn't match solar wind erosion. It doesn't match natural geological decay. It matches weapons-grade fission, the kind that requires 14 million electron-volt neutrons, the kind that only exists inside the fireball of a hydrogen bomb. This data is public. It's been available for decades. It comes from NASA's own instruments. And almost no one is talking about what it means. For most of human history, Mars has been a mirror for our darkest fears. The Babylonians looked up at that blood-red wanderer and named it after Nergal, their god of plague, pestilence, and scorched earth. Percival Lowell spent years at his telescope in Flagstaff, Arizona, convinced he could see irrigation canals slicing across the Martian surface, evidence, he said, of a dying civilization desperately channeling water from polar caps. And when the Viking landers finally touched down in 1976, they sent back photographs of a world that looked like it had been dead for a very, very long time. The mainstream explanation is clean, elegant, and widely accepted. Roughly 4 billion years ago, Mars lost its global magnetic field. Without that invisible shield, solar wind, a relentless stream of charged particles from the sun, began stripping the atmosphere molecule by molecule. Over eons, the oceans evaporated. The sky thinned to almost nothing. Temperatures plummeted. Life, if it ever flickered into existence, was extinguished by slow, impersonal physics. A natural death. Nobody's fault. But Dr. John Brandenburg doesn't buy it. Not because he's a fringe theorist working out of a garage. Brandenburg holds a PhD in plasma physics from the University of California, Davis. He spent years working on defense projects, including the Strategic Defense Initiative, Reagan's Star Wars program. He's published in peer-reviewed journals. He understands nuclear weapons signatures the way a vintner understands soil, instinctively, professionally, and with decades of pattern recognition behind him. When Brandenburg examined the Martian atmospheric data, the same data available to every planetary scientist on Earth, he didn't see the slow, dignified death of a planet losing its air to solar wind. He saw something he recognized from his career: a weapons signature, a specific chemical fingerprint that he'd encountered in classified and unclassified literature about thermonuclear detonations. He gave it a name: LPARE, Large Planetary Altering R Process Event. In plain language, Mars didn't die of natural causes. Mars was killed. And the murder weapon left its fingerprint in every cubic meter of Martian air. To understand why Brandenburg's claim is so explosive, you need to understand what noble gases can tell us about a planet's history. Noble gases, helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, are the silent witnesses of planetary evolution. Because they're chemically inert, they don't react with rocks or water or biological systems. They just sit in the atmosphere, preserving a record of everything that ever happened to it. Their isotopic ratios are like fingerprints. Change the process that shaped the atmosphere, and you change the ratios. Read the ratios correctly, and you can reconstruct what happened, even billions of years after the event. On Earth and in primitive meteorites, the unchanged building blocks of the solar system, the ratio of xenon 129 to xenon 132 holds steady at around 0.97. Balanced, expected, consistent with 4.5 billion years of predictable geological and solar processes. On Mars, that ratio is 2.5, 2.5 times higher than anything else in the inner solar system. And the anomaly doesn't stop at xenon. The ratio of argon-40 to argon-36 on Mars is approximately 3,000, compared to 296 on Earth. Both of these isotopes are produced in significant quantities by one category of physical process: nuclear fission and fusion reactions involving fast neutrons. Now, skeptics have proposed an explanation. They point to the Oklo Natural Reactor in Gabon, Africa, a geological formation where uranium deposits sustained a natural fission chain reaction roughly 2 billion years ago. If it happened on Earth, they argue, perhaps something similar happened on Mars. But there's a critical problem with this comparison. The Oklo reactor operated on slow thermal neutrons, what physicists call the S process. Slow neutron capture produces a very specific spectrum of xenon isotopes, and it does not match what we see on Mars. The Martian data shows the signature of fast neutrons at 14 megaelectron volts, the R process, rapid neutron capture. In nature, this occurs inside supernovae. In human technology, it occurs inside the detonation envelope of a hydrogen bomb. There is no known natural geological process on a planetary surface that produces 14 megaelectron volt neutrons in the quantities required to alter an entire atmosphere. And the evidence doesn't end with the air. The Mars Odyssey orbiter carried a gamma-ray spectrometer, an instrument designed to map the elemental composition of the Martian surface from orbit. What it found was deeply strange. Thorium and uranium, both radioactive elements, are concentrated at two specific hotspots in the northern hemisphere: Mare Acidalium at roughly 50 degrees north latitude and 30 degrees west longitude, and Utopia Planitia at approximately 50 degrees north and 120 degrees east. These concentrations are on the surface, not deep in geological strata, not associated with volcanic vents or mineral deposits. On the surface, distributed like a layer of dust that settled from above, like fallout. And at the center of each hotspot, no impact crater, no scar from a meteorite strike, nothing. If a radioactive asteroid had struck Mars, it would have left a crater proportional to the energy involved. The absence of craters points to something else entirely: an airburst, a detonation at altitude designed to maximize the shockwave footprint and the spread of radioactive material across the widest possible area. That is not a geological event. That is a weapons deployment strategy. It is exactly how modern thermonuclear warheads are designed to function. Brandenburg calculated the energy required to produce the observed xenon 129 enrichment and the surface thorium deposits. The figure? Approximately 10 to the 25th power joules. In more human terms, 1 billion megatons of TNT equivalent. The Tsar Bomba, the most powerful nuclear weapon humanity ever detonated, yielded 50 megatons. Whatever happened on Mars was 20 million times more powerful. Let that settle for a moment. 20 million Tsar Bombas. Enough to strip oceans. Enough to incinerate an atmosphere. Enough to turn a living world into a red, irradiated cemetery. If this was a weapon, it wasn't designed to win a battle. It was designed to end a planet. If Mare Acidalium is ground zero, the point of detonation, then the obvious question becomes, what was the target? Follow the blast shadow south from that radiation hotspot, and you arrive at the most controversial piece of real estate in the solar system: Cydonia Mensae. Since Viking 1 captured frame 35A72 in July 1976, the features at Cydonia have been the subject of fierce, and often dismissive debate. The so-called face on Mars was immediately written off by NASA as pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces in random patterns. Case closed. Nothing to see, move along. But some researchers didn't move along, and when they applied rigorous mathematical analysis to the region, the results were difficult to dismiss as pattern-seeking. Dr. Mark Carlotto, a specialist in digital image processing, applied fractal analysis to the Viking imagery. Fractal dimension is a mathematical measurement of how rough or complex a surface is. Natural geological terrain, hills eroded by wind, mesas carved by water, exhibits high fractal dimensions because erosion creates self-similar patterns at every scale. The more natural a feature, the higher its fractal complexity. Carlotto's results were striking. The face and a nearby structure called the fortress returned the lowest fractal dimensions of any features in the entire Viking frame. Mathematically, they were the smoothest, most geometrically defined objects in the image. They didn't match the landscape around them. They were, in quantitative terms, too ordered, too symmetrical, and too structurally coherent to be products of random erosion. 20 kilometers south of the face stands what researchers Vincent DiPietro and Gregory Molinar named the D and M pyramid. This is not a vaguely triangular hill. It is a five-sided structure, a pentagonal pyramid, exhibiting bilateral symmetry. 5 distinct planar facets meet at sharp edges. The corners appear to show buttressing, structural reinforcement at stress points, an architectural feature designed to bear load. Wind erosion produces yardangs, long, teardrop-shaped ridges aligned with prevailing wind direction. It does not produce 5-faced polyhedra with symmetrical facets and reinforced corners. What disturbed researchers most was the alignment. The principal axis of the D and M pyramid points directly at the face. A second edge aligns with a cluster of mound-like structures called the city. A third edge points to a domed formation called the tholus. These aren't random bearings. Analysis suggests the layout encodes geometric relationships involving the constants e and pi, the kind of mathematical ratios you'd find in planned urban infrastructure, not in wind-carved rock formations. Then there's the fortress, a structure consisting of 4 straight walls enclosing a roughly rectangular courtyard. The walls meet at sharp, angular junctions. Enhanced contrast imaging reveals what appear to be evenly spaced indentations running along the walls, consistent with columnar architecture or structural support systems. Natural erosion tears enclosures apart. It does not build them. And in 2024 and 2025, new data kept arriving. The Perseverance rover identified potential biosignatures, the so-called leopard spots, in rock at Jezero crater, suggesting that ancient microbial life may have once existed in Martian water systems. Gravity measurements revealed anomalously dense structures buried beneath the surface, objects too heavy and too geometrically regular to be explained by standard geological models. Now place all of this on a map. Cydonia sits directly in the path of a shock wave originating from Mare Acidalium. If an airburst occurred at that hotspot, the blast front would have swept across Cydonia at hypersonic speed, shattering weaker structures, melting surfaces, and leaving behind only the most massive, most resilient remnants. Structures that, after hundreds of millions of years of subsequent wind erosion, would look almost, but not quite, natural. We may not be looking at geological curiosities. We may be looking at the ruins of a city that was caught in a thermonuclear firestorm. If an advanced civilization was destroyed on Mars, and if survivors managed to reach the nearest habitable world, we should expect to find echoes of that catastrophe embedded in the oldest records of human culture. Not vague metaphors about divine anger, specific, technical descriptions of weapons and their effects. descriptions that shouldn't be possible for pre-industrial people to fabricate. And that is exactly what we find. On 3 continents, in 3 unconnected traditions, with clinical precision that chills the blood. Begin in Mesopotamia. Around 2000 BCE, the date is debated, but the texts are not. The Sumerian civilization suffered a sudden, mysterious collapse. The Lamentation texts, including the haunting Lament for Ur, don't blame invaders or drought. They blame an invisible force they called the evil wind. The descriptions are specific. The people could scarcely breathe. The wind gripped them and would not grant them another day. Mouths were filled with blood. Hair fell from their heads. Skin turned deathly pale. Water became bitter and undrinkable. Grain was poisoned in the fields. Read those symptoms to any modern physician specializing in nuclear medicine, and they will identify them immediately. Hair and nail loss, destruction of rapidly dividing cells in bone marrow and follicles, a hallmark of acute radiation exposure. Hemorrhaging from mucous membranes, breakdown of platelet production. Pallid skin, collapse of red blood cell counts. Contaminated water and food, radioactive fallout settling into water tables and soil. These are not the symptoms of a sandstorm, a plague, or a military invasion. These are the symptoms of acute radiation syndrome, described with textbook accuracy 4,000 years before the first nuclear test. And the god the Sumerians blamed for this destruction? Nergal, the god of the underworld, of pestilence, of war. The deity whose celestial embodiment was the planet we call Mars. Now cross to the Indian subcontinent. The Mahabharata, one of the longest epic poems in human history, contains a passage in its Drona Parva section that has haunted nuclear physicists since the 1940s. It describes a weapon called the Brahmastra, a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. A column of smoke and flame as brilliant as 10,000 suns rose in all its splendor. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause. Foodstuffs were poisoned. Birds turned white. That last detail is the one that stops nuclear historians in their tracks. Birds turning white. At Hiroshima, thermal radiation from the blast was so intense that it bleached the pigment out of feathers instantaneously, a phenomenon documented in post-attack biological surveys. An Iron Age poet, writing centuries before the concept of electromagnetic radiation existed, described thermal pigment bleaching. That is not a lucky guess. That is not poetic license. That is an observation, recorded by someone who either saw it happen or heard the account from someone who did. Now turn to the Hebrew Bible. Genesis 19:24 describes the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Archaeological excavations at Tal el-Hammam in Jordan have confirmed that around 1650 BCE, a massive airburst event, estimated at 1,000 times the force of the Hiroshima bomb, obliterated a thriving Bronze Age city. Surface temperatures spiked to levels comparable to the surface of the sun. Pottery was melted into glass. The destruction layer contains shocked quartz and spherules consistent with extreme thermal events. 3 civilizations, 3 continents, 0 mutual contact. And all 3 describe the same category of weapon, a weapon that produces mushroom clouds, radiation sickness, thermal bleaching, and food chain contamination with the accuracy of a medical field report. An Iron Age poet describing thermal bleaching in birds. A Sumerian scribe cataloging radiation sickness with diagnostic precision. A Hebrew account confirmed by 21st century excavation. These aren't fairy tales about angry gods throwing thunderbolts. These read like survivor testimony, recorded by people who witnessed technology they had no language to name, no framework to understand, and no choice but to encode as divine wrath. If Mars once housed a civilization that was destroyed in nuclear fire, a natural question follows. Is anything still transmitting? In 1901, Nikola Tesla, arguably the most gifted electrical engineer who ever lived, was conducting experiments with his magnifying transmitter at Colorado Springs when he detected something unexpected. Structured, periodic radio signals arriving from beyond Earth's atmosphere. Signals that exhibited, in Tesla's own words, a clear suggestion of number and order. He decoded the sequence as a simple counting pattern, 1, 2, 3, and publicly declared his belief that the inhabitants of Mars were attempting to make contact. The scientific establishment dismissed him. Tesla was eccentric, they said, brilliant but prone to grandiosity. Then Guglielmo Marconi, the man who commercialized radio, the Nobel laureate, the technological pragmatist, reported the same thing. Clear but incomprehensible messages from an extraterrestrial source he believed was Mars. Two of the sharpest minds in the history of electromagnetic technology working independently, decades apart, reaching the same conclusion. And here's where it stops being a footnote in the history of eccentric genius. In August 1924, Mars reached opposition, its closest approach to Earth in the orbital cycle. The United States government responded with an extraordinary directive: national radio silence. For 3 days, every radio station in America was ordered to cease broadcasting for 5 minutes out of every hour. The U.S. Navy launched a dirigible equipped with a radio receiver to high altitude, far above terrestrial interference. A military cryptographer was placed on standby to decode any intercepted signals. This was not a publicity stunt. This was a coordinated military scientific operation involving federal agencies, the armed forces, and the nation's communications infrastructure. The government of the United States considered the possibility of Martian signals credible enough to silence an entire country's airwaves. What they heard during those silent intervals was reported in contemporary accounts as freakish radio writings, structured, unusual, and ultimately undecoded. The signals were filed, the radio silence ended, the incident was largely forgotten. But the question it raises is not forgotten. If Brandenburg is correct that the Martian civilization was destroyed hundreds of millions of years ago, what was generating structured radio signals in the early 20th century? Automated beacons, still powered by some unknown energy source, broadcasting into the void long after their creators perished? Surviving infrastructure running on autopilot across geological time? Or something even stranger? Something that suggests the timeline of destruction might be far more recent than conventional geology allows. The final piece of this puzzle comes not from a telescope, not from a spectrometer, and not from an ancient text. It comes from a windowless room at the Central Intelligence Agency. In May 1984, as part of Project Stargate, the U.S. intelligence community's long-running and now declassified program investigating remote viewing as an intelligence gathering tool, the CIA conducted a session targeting Mars. The document is publicly available, CIA-RDP 96-0019-0076-0001-9. Anyone can read it. The protocol was designed to eliminate observer bias. The remote viewer was handed a sealed envelope. Inside were coordinates: 40.89 degrees north latitude, 9.55 degrees west longitude, and a temporal instruction, approximately 1 million years before the current era. The viewer was not told the coordinates were on Mars. The viewer was not told what they were looking for. What the viewer described, recorded in real time by a monitor, is remarkable. very large pyramids situated in a depression or valley, a thin, deteriorating atmosphere plagued by violent dust storms, tall, thin beings wearing unusual garments, and a civilization in its death throes, a people searching desperately for a way to survive an environmental catastrophe they could not reverse. The viewer's exact words for their desperation: "It's like jumping from the frying pan into the fire." Now consider the convergences. The coordinates given to the viewer, 40.89 north, 9.55 west, correspond precisely to the Cydonia Mensae region. The pyramids the viewer described match the structures photographed by Viking. The atmospheric deterioration matches the aftermath of Brandenburg's proposed nuclear event. The dying race seeking escape matches the hypothesis that survivors may have fled to another world. And here's the detail that elevates this from curiosity to something harder to dismiss. This session took place in 1984. Brandenburg didn't publish his nuclear Mars hypothesis until years later. The D&M pyramid analysis wasn't widely known. The gamma-ray spectrometer data from Mars Odyssey wouldn't arrive for nearly 2 decades. The CIA's remote viewer described a scenario that would later be independently supported by orbital photography, isotopic chemistry, and mathematical analysis of surface structures, all from sources that did not exist at the time of the session. 3 independent lines of evidence: orbital imagery, atmospheric isotope data, and psychic intelligence converging on the same coordinates, the same structures, and the same narrative of civilizational destruction. Dismissing any one of them individually is reasonable. Dismissing all 3 simultaneously requires a level of coincidence that strains credibility. The atmosphere of Mars carries the isotopic fingerprint of thermonuclear detonation, xenon 129 at 2.5 times terrestrial levels, in a pattern that matches weapons-grade fast neutron fission, and cannot be explained by solar wind, natural reactors, or any known geological process. 2 radiation hotspots mark the northern hemisphere, surface-level concentrations of thorium and uranium distributed like fallout, with no impact craters at their centers. Airbursts, strategic detonations at altitude designed to maximize destruction across the widest possible area. Directly downwind of one of these hotspots, geometric structures defy natural formation. 5-sided pyramids with bilateral symmetry, fortress walls enclosing courtyards, features with fractal dimensions too low for geology and alignments too precise for coincidence. On 3 separate continents, the oldest texts our species ever produced describe weapons whose effects, mushroom clouds, radiation sickness, thermal bleaching, food chain contamination, match nuclear detonation with clinical accuracy. And the god they blamed wears the face of Mars. In the early 20th century, 2 of history's greatest electrical minds independently detected structured signals from the direction of the red planet. Signals compelling enough that the United States government silenced its entire radio infrastructure to listen. And in a classified CIA session, a remote viewer described pyramids, a dying civilization, and an environmental apocalypse at coordinates that precisely matched the site where orbital cameras would later photograph anomalous structures and spectrometers would detect nuclear signatures. Brandenburg calls it LAPAR, Large Planetary Altering R-Process Event. The name is clinical. The reality it describes is not. Someone detonated thermonuclear weapons over Mars. They targeted what appear to be population centers. They succeeded in destroying the atmosphere, the biosphere, and any civilization that existed there. The energy involved, 1 billion megatons, was not incidental. It was not accidental. It was extinction by design. And the survivors, if there were survivors, would have had one option, one direction to flee, one nearby world with breathable air and liquid water. They would have come here. And when they arrived, to the ancestors of the Sumerians, the Indians, the Hebrews,
people with no framework for plasma physics or thermonuclear fusion, they would have seemed like gods. Terrible, powerful, haunted gods. Carrying with them knowledge of agriculture and astronomy and mathematics, and carrying, too, the memory of a weapon so devastating that its description would burn through oral tradition for 4,000 years, preserved in scripture as divine fire, as the Brahmastra, as the evil wind. We didn't invent nuclear weapons in 1945. We may have remembered them.
We are preparing to go to Mars. SpaceX is building the rockets. NASA is selecting the landing sites. International coalitions are drawing up timelines. The language we use is the language of pioneers. First footsteps, new frontiers, the next giant leap. But what if the framing is wrong? What if we're not explorers setting foot on alien soil for the first time? What if we are descendants returning? After an exile measured in millennia or in millions of years, to a home that was burned down around us. The isotopes are there, embedded in the thin Martian air, waiting for anyone with a mass spectrometer and the willingness to ask what they mean. The structures are there, half buried in red dust, their geometry too precise for wind and too silent for coincidence. The ancient accounts are there, carved in cuneiform and Sanskrit and Hebrew, describing what no pre-industrial mind should have been able to imagine. Brandenburg's L-Plaire hypothesis can be tested. Mars sample return missions could analyze the glassy deposits at Mare Acidalium. Ground-penetrating radar at Cydonia could reveal what lies beneath those geometric shadows. The tools exist. The data awaits. The question isn't whether Mars was once alive. The isotopic evidence already suggests an answer. The question, the one that should keep us up at night as we aim our rockets at that red point of light, is whether we're capable of learning from what killed it. Because right now, on this planet, we possess the same category of weapon, and we've built enough of them to do to Earth what someone, at some point, appears to have done to Mars. The red dust holds its secrets, but it won't hold them forever. If this evidence made you reconsider what you thought you knew about our nearest neighbor, if the isotopes and the ruins and the ancient texts feel like more than coincidence to you, I want to hear your answer to one question. When we finally dig beneath the surface of Cydonia, what do you think we'll find? Tell me in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to see the data. And if you want to keep investigating the mysteries that mainstream science refuses to touch, subscribe. There's much more to uncover. The past is buried, but the evidence is speaking. The only question is whether we are ready to listen.